The first thing I noticed about Dante Salvator was not his face. It was the silence. Not the absence of music. The string quartet still moved its bows beneath the chandelier, and crystal still rang softly somewhere near the champagne tower, but a deeper silence. The kind that rolled through a room before a storm touched it. Men stopped leaning. Women lowered their voices. Even Carlo, beside me, loosened his grip on my elbow by exactly 1 inch. That was how power arrived in rooms like these, not loudly, precisely. I kept my smile where I had pinned it at the beginning of the charity gala and stared at the sweep of marble beyond the dancers. I wore my mother's midnight dress, a string of seed pearls and black lace gloves that climbed just past my wrists. In June, indoors, no one had mentioned the gloves. In my family, not mentioning a thing was how people helped you carry it. "Stand up straighter," Carlo murmured without moving his lips. His smile shone white for the donors circling the room. "You look funereal," my spine tightened. "Then perhaps you should stop stepping on my grief." He glanced at me, surprised enough that I almost regretted it. Almost. Carlo Rinaldi had elegant hands. The kind magazines liked to photograph, beside a watch face or a cigar. Last night, one of those elegant hands had closed around my wrist because I laughed at the wrong moment during dinner with his father. He had not hit me in the face. Carlo believed in respectable injuries. Places a dress could keep the peace, places lace could finish the lie. "Don't start tonight," he said. I could still feel the crescent moons his fingers had left beneath the gloves. I wasn't aware I had stopped. His jaw flexed. He leaned closer, cologne sharp and expensive and overused. "You're very near the end of what I find charming, Adriana." I looked at the dance floor and told myself I had been near that end for months. My father's atelier had been sinking since his stroke and final winter. Debts came with polished shoes and sympathetic voices. Carlo's father, Councilman Rinaldi, had offered a solution that smelled like rescue until it became a cage. An engagement, stability, protection. The kind of arrangement decent families whispered gratitude over. My father died 3 weeks later. By then the ring was already on my finger. "Councilman Rinaldi." A voice came from behind us, low enough to feel before it registered. Not warm, not cold, something worse, controlled. I turned. Dante Salvator stood a few feet away, one hand in his pocket, the other resting at his side as if it had never needed to become a weapon. He was taller than Carlo by enough to make Carlo look suddenly unfinished. Black suit, white shirt, no tie pin, no obvious display. Dark hair brushed back from a face that might have been beautiful if it were not so severe. A faint scar near his mouth, eyes that were not icy, exactly. Winter seawater, maybe. The kind that hid depth by darkening. Everyone in New York knew his name. Some people pretended not to. "Salvator," Carlo recovered quickly. Men like him mistook confidence for immunity. Enjoying the fundraiser, Dante's attention slid over him and stopped on me. It was the gloves. I knew it before his gaze settled there. Perhaps because I had been waiting all night for someone to look too long. Perhaps because shame made prophets of us. His eyes lifted to my face. "Miss Belafere." I had met him once before, years earlier, when my father repaired hand-embroidered altar cloths for St. Michael's and Dante had come to pay for a funeral mass. I remembered nothing from that day except black candles and the feeling that no one had known where to put their own hands around him. "Mr. Salvator," I said. "Dante," he said. It was not an invitation. It was a correction. Carlo laughed lightly. "Adriana restores lace and vintage textiles. She's old-fashioned." Formality comforts her. If Dante understood the insult nested inside the sentence, he gave no sign. He stepped nearer, not into my space. Close enough that I smelled something clean and dark beneath the night air still clinging to his coat. Cedar, cold stone, rain that had not reached the ground. His gaze dropped again to the black lace on my hands. "You wear gloves in summer," he asked. Carlo answered for me. "Aesthetic eccentricity." Dante did not look at him. I asked her. That inch Carlo had given me earlier vanished. His fingers closed around my elbow again, warning disguised as possession. Something in Dante changed. Stillness, I learned later, had temperature. His turned lethal. I bruise easily, I said before the men could measure each other any further. Dante's eyes came back to mine. Do you? I should have lied better. I should have laughed. Women survived rooms like this by keeping men from seeing the seams. Instead, perhaps because I was tired, perhaps because the quartet had started a waltz I remembered dancing with my father in our kitchen when I was 12, I heard myself say, "If you're going to see it, don't be polite." Carlo's grip bit hard enough to sting. "Adriana," I turned my hand upward, offered it, not like a plea, more like surrender to the truth of my own body. For one suspended second, no one moved. Dante looked at my exposed palm, then at Carlo's fingers on my arm. He reached forward, not fast, not roughly, and touched the edge of the glove at my wrist. The lace whispered against my skin. Dry. Delicate, treacherously soft. "May I?" he asked. No man had ever asked before uncovering damage he thought he owned. I nodded. He slid the glove down with unbearable care. Black lace gathered over my knuckles. Then the bruise came into the ballroom air, violet fingerprints wrapped around pale skin like a confession. Not one mark. Several, layered over older yellowing shadows I had convinced myself no one would notice. Carlo let go of me. No one around us spoke. The quartet, God help them, kept playing. Dante looked at my wrist for a heartbeat too long. When he raised his eyes, they were emptier than before. "Who did that?" "Dante," Carlo said, smiling again, though the edges had gone thin. "Surely we don't need melodrama at a charity." Dante took my glove in one hand and asked me again. "Who?" I should have said it. Instead, I heard my mother's voice from years ago. A woman can survive almost anything if she learns when silence costs less. But something about the way he held the lace, as if it were evidence and not decoration, made me reckless. I looked at Carlo. That was enough. Dante turned to him with the patience of a man choosing where to place a knife. "Leave," Carlo laughed. "Wrong move. You don't give me orders. You raised a hand to a woman under my roof. This is a hotel ballroom, not a throne room." Dante took one step closer. Men near us subtly shifted back. "You misunderstand me. I wasn't discussing architecture." The councilman appeared then, silver-haired and alarmed, his wife behind him like a prayer gone pale. A few donors noticed. The silence widened. "Gentlemen," Councilman Rinaldi said too brightly, "we're among friends." Dante handed me my glove without looking away from Carlo. "Miss Belafere, put that back on." My fingers shook once as I pulled the lace over my skin. I hated that he saw. Then Dante did the strangest thing of the night. He offered me his arm. "Dance with me," he said. Carlo gave a short, incredulous laugh. "Absolutely not." Dante's gaze stayed on me. "Miss Belafere." I knew enough about men like him to understand that refusal could be a door I would never reopen. I also knew enough about men like Carlo to understand that saying yes would cost something immediate. My pulse climbed into my throat. Then I put my hand on Dante's sleeve. The room inhaled. On the dance floor, he kept a perfect distance. His palm settled at my back, warm and broad and immaculately restrained. He did not pull me close. Did not lower his mouth to my ear like Carlo always did when he wanted ownership to look intimate. He simply moved me through the waltz as if he had made a decision and the rest of the city would adjust. "You should not have done that," I whispered. "Covered it. Shown him." His jaw hardened. "You showed me." A turn. The chandelier fractured above us in 100 trembling lights. "Why?" I asked before I could stop myself. His eyes touched my face. "Because he hurt you. That has never before been enough to interest a man like you." For the first time I felt it, a hairline crack in his composure. Not anger, something older. "Don't decide what interests me," he said quietly. When the dance ended, he did not return me to Carlo. Instead, he guided me toward a side corridor, flanked by white orchids, and armed men, pretending to be decorative staff. Lucia Morty, whom I recognized from newspaper photographs mislabeling her as a legal consultant, stepped from the shadows with a coat already in her hands. "I need my bag," I said. "It's being collected," she said. I stopped walking. "I am not leaving with strangers." Dante turned then, enough that I had to look directly at him. "No, Lace," he said, the nickname falling cold and precise between us. "You're leaving with me." The corridor doors opened. I did not go home. The car smelled like leather, rain, and expensive silence. I sat in the back seat of a black sedan that could have passed for diplomatic, if not for the men in front carrying themselves like violence on retainer. Lucia rode beside the driver, scrolling through messages on a phone that never seemed to stop lighting up. Dante sat opposite me in the rear-facing jump seat, impossible and steady, his knees almost touching mine every time the car turned. No one explained anything for the first 10 minutes. I watched Manhattan slide by in reflected gold and black. My heart had not caught up to my body. It was still in the ballroom, laid out beside the waltz and the shape of my bruise in his hand. "Where are we going?" I asked. "Somewhere safe," Lucia said. "That word has been used on me before." Lucia glanced back. Something unreadable flickered across her face. Approval, maybe, or pity. Dante looked out the rain-streaked window. Not by anyone who meant it. I should have said I had a home, that my atelier apartment over Belafere Restorations was mine. That whatever arrangement, he believed himself entitled to had been made without my consent. Instead, I folded my hands in my lap and stared at the black lace. One glove slightly crooked from how hurriedly I had pulled it back on. The whisper of it against my skin made my stomach turn. He noticed. Of course he noticed. "Take them off," Dante said. "No," his eyes came to mine. "You don't have to hide from my people. I'm not hiding from your people. What are you doing?" "Then, keeping my dignity from becoming a topic in your car." For a second Lucia's mouth threatened a smile. Dante said nothing, but he leaned back, granting the refusal without contest. That should not have felt intimate. It did. We reached the house, though house was not the right word. It was a limestone estate on the edge of the river, too old and severe to be called a mansion without sounding vulgar. Iron gates, lantern-lit stone. Security so discreet it almost passed for architecture. When the car door opened, night air hit my face with the scent of water and clipped hedges. Myrla met us in the foyer, silver hair pinned at the nape, black dress immaculate, eyes sharper than any gunman's. She took one look at me, then at Dante, then at my gloves. "Madonna," she said flatly, "you bring me trouble in silk." "Prepare the blue guest room," Dante said. Myrla's gaze landed on him like a wooden spoon. "I have eyes." I gathered that from the way every armed man in this house stopped breathing when your car pulled in. She turned to me. "Come, before he decides to brood in the doorway until dawn." I almost smiled. Almost, the blue room overlooked the river. Not ornate. Controlled. Cream walls, dark wood, a hand-knotted rug, fresh flowers that smelled faintly of pepper and green stems. On the bed lay folded night clothes, a robe, and toiletries arranged with military tenderness. "I don't own blue silk," Myrla said, as if apologizing for the room itself. "So that belongs to a dead cousin." She was dramatic but slim. "It should fit." "Thank you." She crossed the room and, without touching me, inspected my face the way seamstresses inspect torn hems, not unkindly but with technical offense. "Did he hit your face?" "No, because if he had, Dante would already be digging a foundation." I stared. She shrugged. "I run the house, not the mythology. Wash." "I'll send tea." When she left, I stood in the middle of the room and listened to the silence. No traffic, no upstairs neighbors, no crack in the radiator pipes like the atelier apartment. Just river and old walls and my own pulse. My phone was gone. Of course it was gone. I found it charging on the desk 15 minutes later, along with a note in Lucia's blunt handwriting. We screened it. "Your calls are monitored for tonight. Complain tomorrow." I almost laughed, which felt traitorous to the person I had been that morning. After I changed, I found Dante in a study downstairs lined with books too worn to be decorative. He stood at the windows, jacket off, shirt sleeves rolled once, speaking quietly in Italian to two men who vanished the moment I entered. He turned. My body did something embarrassing and immediate, a startled tightening low in my ribs. Not desire, not yet, just awareness sharpened into a point. "Sit," he said. I remained standing. You brought me to your house, took my phone, screened my calls, and now you're giving instructions in one-word sentences. His gaze drifted to the robe tied too tightly around my waist, then returned to my face. Yes, that was not an invitation for self-congratulation. A corner of his mouth moved, not a smile, the memory of one. Before he could answer, the study door opened, and a broad-shouldered man in a charcoal suit appeared carrying a tray piled with sliced pear, cheese, olives, and what looked offensively like 3 tiny cream pastries. "Boss," he said, "Myrla said if I didn't bring the tray intact, she'd tell God I wasted prosciutto." "Paolo," Dante said. Paolo Ferri set the tray down and looked at me with honest curiosity and the wary respect of a man who had already heard 3 versions of me in the hall. He was handsome in a weathered, overthrown general way, with tired, kind eyes and the permanent expression of someone being bullied by desserts. "Miss Bellafere," he said solemnly, "welcome to the least restful safe house in North America." I blinked. He pointed at the pastries. "Don't touch those unless you want Myrla emotionally invested in your blood sugar." "Paolo," Dante said. "What? I'm providing context." "The woman weaponizes mascarpone." I laughed before I could stop it. All 3 of them looked at me. My laugh died of humiliation. "I'm sorry." "For what?" Paolo asked. "If anyone should apologize, it's carbohydrates." Myrla's voice floated in from the hall. "I heard that, Paolo." He shut his eyes briefly. "See, this is why I can't lose 12 pounds. The house is haunted." Myrla entered carrying tea. "You can't lose 12 pounds because you flirt with focaccia." "I do not flirt with bread." "You looked at the dinner rolls last Sunday like a sailor seeing shore." To my horror, I laughed again. This time it stayed. Dante watched me over the rim of the glass he lifted, expression unreadable. When Myrla and Paolo were gone, the room quieted too fast. Dante set his drink down. "Here are the rules." The laughter drained out of me, leaving only awareness. "You don't leave this house without security. You don't answer unknown numbers. If anyone from the Rinaldis contacts you, Lucia sees it first. You don't speak about my life as if it's been repossessed." His gaze held mine. "Your life was already being repossessed." It landed because it was true. I hated him a little for saying it. I looked away first. "You can't keep me here indefinitely." "No." The word surprised me enough that I looked back. "No," I repeated. "I won't keep anyone who wants to walk into danger with both eyes open." He paused. "But tonight you stay." My throat tightened around the question I did not want to ask. "Why?" He was quiet long enough to make the study seem larger. "Because men like Carlo don't forgive humiliation," he said, "and men above him don't forgive being witnessed." I thought of the councilman's face at the ballroom. Not outrage, calculation. Something cold moved under my skin. Dante glanced at my gloved hands. "Take those off now. Why does it matter to you?" "It matters to me because he taught you to dress pain as etiquette." His voice stayed level. "And I'm telling you not to do that here." My fingers trembled once. I hated that too. Slowly, I peeled off the right glove, then the left. The bruises looked uglier in lamplight, more intimate. His face did not change, but the room did. He stepped around the desk and held out his hand, not to seize, not to command, just open. Waiting, I stared at it. "This is absurd," I whispered. "Yes." I placed my bruised hand in his. His fingers closed carefully, his thumb resting nowhere near the marks. Heat moved through my skin with humiliating speed. He examined the damage only once, then lifted his head. "Lucia will send a doctor," he said, "and Carlo Rinaldi will not touch you again." There it was, quiet, unmistakable. Not a promise dressed as romance, a verdict. "You say things," I said, pulling my hand back before the contact turned into something I could not name. "As if the city rearranges itself for your convenience." Dante's eyes darkened in a way I did not understand then. "Only the parts that threaten you, Lace." I slept in the blue room with my gloves in the drawer and his rule under my skin. The next morning the river looked harmless. That offended me. I stood at the blue room window in one of Myrla's borrowed cardigans and tried to remember how ordinary girls solved extraordinary problems. Call a lawyer, call a friend, return home. Pretend the night before had not split the world along a seam that could not be restitched. Then Lucia knocked once and entered with coffee, a tablet, and a file folder thick enough to bruise. You have choices, she said. I accepted the coffee first. That sounds suspiciously unlike kidnapping. It's organized protection, she said. Kidnapping has worse linens. She set the file on the table between us. My name was on the tab. That startled me more than it should have. I would object to that, I said. You may. After reading. Inside were copies of invoices from my father's atelier, shipping records, photographs of people I recognized from society pages and church fundraisers, and 3 pages of property documents related to Belafere restorations. Debt notices, liens, quiet acquisitions through shell companies I did not understand. At the bottom was Carlo's name linked to one of them. My coffee soured in my mouth. What is this? Pressure, Lucia said. Applied over 18 months. Your engagement was not rescue, it was the final transfer. I sat down slowly. No, I said, though the papers did not care. My father would never have agreed to. Your father agreed to very little after the stroke. Other people began agreeing for him. I read until the words blurred. My Uncle Renato's signature appeared twice where I had believed loyalty lived. Carlo's father on another page. And woven through the paperwork, like a dark thread I could not yet see clearly, were references to old commissions from our atelier. Altar cloths, bridal veils, lace restoration for private estates. Why those? Why does Dante care about my father's books? I asked, Lucia's expression closed by fractions. Because someone else does. That was not an answer, and she knew it. Then let me ask a better question. I set the papers down. Why did my father keep no digital archive? Ask him. The cruelty of grief was that impossible sentences still hurt, she noticed. Her tone softened by almost nothing. I'm taking you to the atelier. You'll pack what matters. We close it after. Close, temporarily, I should have argued. Instead I said, I'm not parading through my neighborhood with armed men. You'll be in an unmarked car. Paolo will pretend he's your cousin and complain about parking. It's the most believable thing about him. Paolo, when I met him downstairs, was holding 2 boiled eggs in one hand and a prayer card in the other. I'm fasting, he announced to no one in particular. Myrla slid a paper bag into his coat pocket. There are almond biscuits for later. He looked wounded. This is sabotage. It's love, she said. He blushed so violently, I nearly missed Dante entering the foyer. He had changed into a charcoal suit and dark overcoat. No visible weapon, which somehow made the invisible ones more obvious. His gaze moved over me once, taking in jeans, boots, plain sweater, hair braided back. I had not worn gloves. That, too, he noticed. Something unreadable passed over his face and was gone. You're coming, I asked. Yes, you don't trust your people. I don't trust coincidence, which was not the same answer. The atelier sat on a narrow street in Brooklyn, where old Italian bakeries now shared walls with minimalist cafes pretending history began at exposed brick. Belafere restorations occupied the top 2 floors of a faded building with green trim and windows my father refused to replace because light behaves better through old glass. The key stuck twice. Before yielding. The smell hit me first. Linen, starch, cedar blocks, old silk, dust warmed by morning sun. The scent of every hour I had ever believed life could still be mended with patience. My throat closed. Dante stayed near the door while I crossed to the main worktable. Lace collars lay pinned beneath muslin. An unfinished bridal veil rested over a padded form like surrender made holy. My father's spectacles still sat beside the magnifying lamp. I touched them, did not cry, not yet. This place is beautiful, Paolo said softly, and because he said it without irony, I liked him for it. It used to be louder, I said. Shops like this always are before men ruin them, Myrla would have said. Lucia moved through the cabinets, photographing ledgers. Dante remained still, but his stillness was active here, examining exits, shadows, the line of fire no one else wanted to think about. I crossed to the back room where I kept my tools. Fine scissors, beeswax, bone folders, French needles so thin they vanished against the skin. On the highest shelf sat my father's walnut workbox. Locked, I frowned. I did not remember it locked. Behind me, Dante said, "What is it?" "My father's box." I tried the latch again. He never locked it. "Step aside." "I can open wood, Mr. Salvetter. I'm not helpless." One of Paolo's brows went up. Dante's eyes cooled, though not with offense. "Show me." I set the box on the cutting table and drew a narrow tool from my apron pocket. Habit, a conservator's probe, flat and delicate. The lock was old brass, decorative more than secure. I worked the tool in, listened, adjusted pressure, and lifted the lid cleanly in under 20 seconds. Paolo exhaled. "Madonna. I'm never leaving my car keys near you." Despite everything, I smiled. Inside the box were bobbins, paper patterns, old receipts, and a packet wrapped in muslin. I opened it carefully. 2 black lace gloves, not mine, older, handmade Chantilly with tiny repairs along the seams, exquisite work, familiar somehow. I held one to the light. The floral pattern was interrupted in 3 places by stitches too dense to belong. Not repair. Code. My father had taught me to recognize his hidden hand from the back, from tension alone. These were his knots. "What are you seeing?" Dante asked. I wet my lips. "This lace was altered, deliberately." Lucia came closer. Meaning the pattern is wrong on purpose." My pulse quickened. "If you understand traditional repeats, these interruptions form a sequence. Can you read it?" "Not here." "Not without tracing paper and time." Dante's gaze remained on the glove. "Take it." I did. Both gloves, the receipts, the paper patterns beneath. My fingers shook harder when I found an old photograph slipped into the bottom of the box. My father younger, standing beside another man in front of St. Michael's Rectory. The other man's face had been cut neatly out, not torn in anger, removed with care. I looked up. Dante was watching the photograph with a stillness I did not trust. Before I could ask, a crash sounded downstairs. Everyone moved at once. Paolo drew first. Lucia pushed me behind the cutting table. Dante was already at the stairwell by the time the second crash came, glass this time, and male voices from the shop below. My body locked, not from bravery. From the animal certainty that the world had found me again. Dante turned his head just enough to look back at me. "Stay!" Then he disappeared down the stairs. I heard 3 things in quick order. A grunt, a body hitting wood, and Dante's voice saying something too low to make out. Not shouted. Worse, controlled enough that fear sharpened. Paolo swore under his breath. Lucia pressed a finger to her mouth. The room held. A minute later Dante returned, his coat open, knuckles split, expression unchanged. Behind him, 2 of his men dragged a bleeding stranger from the front room. The man's sleeve had caught on a display hook, leaving a bright torn triangle of fabric behind. He had come to break in. He had known where to come. "Who was that?" I asked. Dante's jaw tightened. An answer arriving early. My gaze went to the cutout face in the photograph still lying on the table. Someone was already moving against us. By the time we left the atelier, the block had become theater. Police lights washed the bakery windows blue. Neighbors stood in half-open doors pretending curiosity was civic duty. One of Dante's men had fed the officers a version of events involving attempted burglary and routine concern. No one looked at me directly, which somehow felt worse than staring. The shop was sealed. Temporary, Lucia had said, but the wax over the lock looked final. I stood on the church steps across from Belafere Restorations and watched St. Michael's narrow bronze doors reflect the pulsing lights. My father used to say churches and workshops smelled alike if you paid attention: wax, dust, devotion, and the ache of repetition. "Your foot is bleeding," Dante said. I looked down. A splinter of glass had lodged near my ankle while we packed in the chaos upstairs. I had not felt it until he said it. Now pain arrived all at once, hot and specific. "It's nothing." He crouched before I finished the sentence. I went very still. Men did not kneel in front of me. Men leaned, towered, blocked, decided. But Dante Salvator, whose name made donors swallow wrong and policemen soften their tone, crouched on cold church stone and looked up at my bare ankle like it mattered. "Sit," he said. "There are 40 people watching. Then give them a better scandal." I should not have obeyed. I sat on the top step anyway. His fingers closed lightly around my calf, steadying, while he examined the cut. Heat flashed through me so fast I almost pulled away, not because he hurt me, because he didn't. The almost of that movement sat between us like a live wire. He removed the splinter with a handkerchief and the kind of care that belonged to different men. My breath snagged when his thumb brushed the inside of my ankle by accident. Or not by accident, I could not tell with him. That was becoming a problem. "You keep surprising me," he said. With my thrilling talent for stepping on broken glass, with that lock, his eyes lifted briefly. "And the lace? My father taught me to read thread the way some fathers teach daughters to read stock tables. He taught you to hide code in pattern repeats." I looked at the church doors. "He taught me to notice when something beautiful is wrong." The words settled. Dante finished binding the cut with his handkerchief, then rose in one smooth motion. His suit trousers had stone dust at the knees now. That fact lodged in me for reasons I refused to examine. Paolo came up the steps holding 2 coffees and a paper bag that smelled aggressively of sugar. "I brought cannoli," he said, looking guilty before anyone accused him. "For morale," Lucia took one without thanking him. "Your definition of morale is getting medically concerning." "I'm under siege." Paolo handed me a coffee. "Meyerla says stress doesn't count if pastry is involved." "Does Dante know you quote Meyerla like scripture?" I asked. Paolo pressed a hand to his heart. "Miss Bellafere, I would die before blaspheming in front of the boss." "You say that as if he isn't standing right there," Lucia muttered. Paolo glanced at Dante, who had gone still looking at the church. "He's doing the thing." "The thing?" I asked. "The quiet planning that ends with someone regretting their education." Despite the nausea twisting in me, I laughed. Paolo brightened. "Good. You're still a person." It was such a gentle sentence that it nearly broke me. Lucia's phone buzzed. She read the message and swore once in perfect Italian. "What?" Dante asked. "The man from the shop is dead." My coffee went cold in my hand. "You killed him?" Dante's gaze came to mine, unreadable. "No." The relief that moved through me was immediate and humiliating. Lucia continued, "Cyanide capsule, false tooth, professional." Her eyes sharpened. "Someone expected him to be caught." Dante turned back to the church. "Raphael." The name meant nothing to me then, but it hit Lucia and Paolo like weather memory. Paolo lost all trace of humor. Lucia went pale beneath olive skin. "Impossible," she said. "Nothing impossible about rot resurfacing," Dante said. I watched all 3 of them. "Who is Raphael?" No one answered immediately. That told me enough. Paolo cleared his throat. "A bad old story. I'm standing in the middle of it," I said. "Try again." Dante took a long moment before speaking. "He was once my consigliere." We buried that version of him. "And failed," Lucia said. The wind moved through the narrow street, carrying incense from the noon mass just starting inside St. Michael's. Dante's face changed almost invisibly at the scent, not softened, hollowed. I saw then what his control cost him, not through a speech, through absence, a place inside him where something had burned and never been rebuilt. "Did he do this?" I asked quietly. "To the shop. He sent someone." Dante's eyes remained on the church doors. "He wants what your father left. The gloves, and whatever they lead to. Why not just ask?" Paolo made a strangled sound that might have been a laugh if not for the fear in it. "Signorina, men like Raphael ask with explosives." Dante looked at me then. "Your father hid financial records in commissioned lace for years. Names, shipments. Payments routed through churches, charities, private estates." I stared at him. "No," I said reflexively. "My father restored textiles." "He did," Dante said. "And he kept himself alive by doing other work for dangerous men." The fast mystery snapped into place so hard I almost swayed. The odd invoices, The special commissions, the locked workbox. My father had not only mended beauty, he had buried truth in it. He never told me. He meant not to, Dante said. The chapel bell rang once above us, a hard bronze note. My father used to bring me here after long work days, buying me orange soda from the corner shop and letting me run my fingers over the carved saints while he spoke with Father Domenico about hymns and holiness. Suddenly every memory had a second face. I hated that too. What does the code say? Dante asked. I can read part of it tonight, I swallowed, if you tell me everything. No, I stared at him. You are intolerable, and you are injured, targeted, and still arguing on church steps. I'm capable of multitasking. The look that crossed his face should not have warmed me. It did anyway. Paolo offered me the paper bag. Canelo, isn't Myrla trying to kill your diet? He sighed. At this point, my diet is a hostage situation. Against all reason, I took one. The shell shattered delicately under my teeth, sweet ricotta and candied orange flooding my mouth. I closed my eyes for 1 second. When I opened them, Dante was watching me in a way that felt too private for daylight. He looked away first. That tiny restraint hit harder than if he had touched me again. The almost. Another rung on a ladder neither of us had named. Back at the house that evening, I spread tracing paper over the old gloves at the long library table. Lucia stood over my shoulder. Paolo hovered with chamomile tea and one illicit biscotto. Dante remained across the room on a call, speaking in low Italian, blood on his knuckles dried to rust. I traced repeats, counted knots, followed my father's interruptions through the floral pattern. Then I found it. Not numbers alone, coordinates, a location hidden inside the lace. A chapel crypt beneath St. Michael's. I looked up slowly. Dante had ended his call. He was watching me already. What is it, Lace? The nickname sounded different now, not softer, closer. I laid my hand over the traced pattern and felt the night open under us. It was never just about money, I said, and somewhere in the house, a door locked. We went to the crypt the next afternoon. Not dramatically, no midnight torchlight, no whispered Latin over candles. St. Michael's was open for weekday prayer, the nave cool and dim, beeswax and incense hanging in the air like something that had chosen not to leave. Women in black veils knelt beneath the side altar. A child dropped a missal. Somewhere high above us, a chair scraped stone. The violence in my life had become so refined that it now wore church shoes. Father Domenico met us near the sacristy, older than I remembered. His shoulders bowed, but his eyes still alive with that restless intelligence priests sometimes mistook for humility. He kissed my cheek, smelled faintly of candle smoke and mint, and held me away long enough to study my face. You've lost weight, he said. So has everyone who knows the price of rent. His mouth twitched. Then he saw Dante behind me and that almost smile vanished. Mr. Salvator, father. The single word carried 20 years of unfinished history. I felt it at once. Another current under the floor. Lucia stayed near the side aisle. Paolo took up position by the chapel door with all the ease of a man pretending. He wasn't armed under a navy suit. He carried a paper cup that proclaimed green juice on the side and smelled, unmistakably, like espresso. That is not green juice, I murmured as we passed him. He lowered his voice. I poured coffee into the cup. If Myrla asks, I'm committed to wellness. You're going to hell, he sighed. At least there'll be pastry. Father Domenico led us below the church through a narrow stairwell carved into old stone. The air cooled sharply. My boots sounded too loud on the steps. Dante walked behind me, not touching me, but close enough that I felt the heat of him each time the stair curved. The nearness made my thoughts clumsy. Another almost. By the time we reached the crypt, my pulse had a second rhythm. It was smaller than I expected. Not a grand undercroft of saints and bones, but a cramped chamber of old family plaques, disused vestments, and a locked iron gate hiding the oldest burial alcove. My father had once brought me down here to inspect moth damage on a coffin drape. I remembered being 7 and convinced the dead could hear me breathe. Your father came here often in his last year, Father Domenico said. I turned. You never told me. You never asked why he donated more to the church than he could afford. That hurt because it was fair. I took the traced pattern from my satchel and matched the repeat to the carved border on the iron gate. Third panel from the left, a flower with one petal slightly wrong. My father's code again. Beauty made unreliable on purpose. I knelt, ran my fingertips along the stone base and found a shallow groove. He didn't hide it in the gate, I said. He hid the key to the gate. Dante crouched beside me. I became painfully conscious of the fact that if I turned my head an inch, my mouth would be near his jaw. My hands were steadier than the rest of me. I worked a thin tool into the groove and pressed. A section of stone shifted. Lucia exhaled once. Father Domenico crossed himself. Inside the cavity sat an oilskin packet, a small brass key, and a rosary wrapped around a photograph. My fingers stalled on the beads. Adriana, Dante said quietly. I'm fine. It was a lie so bad even Paolo, by the door, looked offended on behalf of language. I took the key, rose, and fitted it into the iron gate. The lock gave with a rusted click. Inside the alcove stood a wooden chest no larger than a sewing case. When I opened it, the first thing I saw was lace, not finished pieces, samples, trials. Pattern tests in cream, black, and ivory, each pinned to cards with dates written in my father's hand. Beneath them lay ledger sheets sealed in wax, a bundle of old property deeds, and a letter addressed only with a single initial. S. Dante went still, not theatrically, organ deep. I noticed because I had started noticing everything about the temperature of his silences. What is it? I asked. His gaze was fixed on the letter. Nothing. That was so obviously untrue, I nearly laughed. Instead, I reached past the documents and lifted one of the pattern cards. A half-finished rosette in black silk thread, its outer ring tightly worked, the center left open and fragile, held by a single tension strand so thin it seemed impossible it had not snapped. Paolo drifted closer. Pretty. It isn't meant to be. I turned it over. My father had written strength is often one thread pretending to be many. The words lodged under my ribs. I set the card on a work tray, found spare thread in the chest, and without thinking began to finish the rosette the way my father would have wanted, carefully. Preserving the tension, instead of correcting it. My hands moved from memory, twist, pass, anchor, return, the center trembled with each knot. What are you doing? Lucia asked. Showing you what he meant. I held it up when I finished. See the edge, corded, strong, but the center is suspended on one hidden line. Cut that and the whole piece collapses inward. Paolo leaned in. So it looks tougher than it is. Yes. His expression softened as he looked from the lace to me. He was not a stupid man, merely a hungry one. Dante watched in silence. I set the rosette down too quickly. I've been making these for months. Everyone looked at me. What? Lucia said. I swallowed. After my father died, I knew the invoices were wrong. I knew the commissions didn't match the work. I thought maybe he'd left a pattern I could read if I copied his hand closely enough. My cheeks burned. So I've been reproducing old samples from memory at night. Hidden ones. I kept telling myself it was grief. It was. It was fear sharpened into craft, suspicion dressed as devotion. Dante's eyes moved over my face with unsettling focus. Why didn't you tell anyone? Because the only people asking questions were the Rinaldis. And you didn't trust me, he said. I barely trust gravity. A faint sound escaped Paolo, suspiciously close to a laugh. Lucia ignored him. I reached for the sealed letter with the single initial and stopped when Dante's hand closed over mine. Not hard, but all the blood in me seemed to hear it. His thumb rested near my wrist, exactly where the bruises had been darkening days ago. He did not look at our hands, only at me. Don't, he said. Why? His gaze dropped at last to the letter. Something old and terrible moved behind his eyes. Because I know who that was for. I stared at him. Then understanding arrived in pieces I did not want. The photograph wrapped in the rosary. The initial, the way St. Michael's had hollowed his face in Chapter 4 with scent alone. The dead sister I had not yet known enough to name. Seraphina, I said softly. He let go of my hand. That was worse than if he had tightened it. Father Domenico looked away. Lucia's expression turned carefully blank. Paolo suddenly found the far wall fascinating. Dante took the letter, slid it into his inner pocket without opening it, and said, "Take the ledgers." The command was too clipped to challenge, so I obeyed, not because he had authority. Because grief had entered the room, and even I knew how to step around it. We were halfway back up the stairs when Lucia called for a halt. She held one ledger sheet in gloved fingers. "This seal is broken," I turned. She was right, one page missing. "How?" I asked. "The chest was hidden." Dante's face hardened with terrifying calm. "It wasn't hidden from everyone." Father Domenico went pale. "I never told." "No," Dante said, "but someone did." I thought of my uncle Renato, of property transfers signed in quiet ink, of Councilman Rinaldi smiling over my engagement ring, of all the respectable men who had learned to wear corruption like a pressed shirt. Then I saw it. On the inside lip of the chest, almost missed in the rust and dust, the fresh smear of dark wax from a signet ring, not fully wiped away. Renato wore a signet ring with our family crest. My stomach dropped. "He's involved," I whispered. Dante looked at the mark once. "Suspected. Don't soften it." "I'm not softening anything, Lace." His voice lowered. "I'm deciding when to move." When we reached the nave again, the church had filled. Candles fluttered. Someone had begun the litany of the saints near the side altar. I stood in the half-light with ledgers against my chest and felt the shape of my life shifting again. My uncle had not merely looked away. He had reached in first. Dante took the documents from me, his fingers brushing mine only briefly, and said the one thing that made the whole church feel suddenly too small. Someone told him we found it. War did not announce itself with sirens, it arrived with roses. A white box appeared at the house just before dusk, delivered by a florist whose van had real branding and false plates. Paolo intercepted it in the foyer, joked that no one had ever sent him flowers despite his obvious emotional availability, then went quiet when Lucia found the wire threaded beneath the arrangement. The bomb squad took 4 minutes to confirm what Dante had already known. The flowers were not for the house. They were for me. Raphael's card lay tucked among the white garden roses in expensive cream stock. "Lace hides damage beautifully. Let's see if she survives the unveiling." I read it once and could not feel my fingers. Paolo swore in 3 dialects. Lucia's face became a blade. Myrla, who had come in carrying a bowl of lemons from the kitchen garden, set it down so carefully that I knew she wanted to throw it through a man's skull. Dante took the card from my hand. Nothing in his expression changed, which had become its own kind of terror. "Upstairs," he said. "No," all 4 of them looked at me. I stood in the center of the foyer with fear moving like cold water through my legs, and found, to my own surprise, that I was tired of being moved like luggage. "I'm done being told a single noun and expected to obey it," I said. "If a man I've never met is sending bombs and poetry to a house I'm in, then I am already in this." Dante stepped closer. "And because you are in this, you go upstairs. You still haven't told me what he wants. The ledger, and me," Dante said. The room changed. Lucia looked away first. Paolo muttered a prayer that sounded suspiciously like gossip addressed to God. I stared at Dante. "Why?" He held my gaze for so long my pulse lost shape. "Because he prefers to destroy what belongs to other men." There it was, the phrase he had never used and did not quite use now. "Not your mine." Worse, somehow, more careful. Myrla cut through the silence. "Paolo, take the box to the courtyard before I start making confessions." On it, he lifted the tray with mournful dignity. "This is why romance is dead." Lucia moved toward the security room to coordinate sweeps. Dante caught my elbow lightly and guided me toward the back terrace, where the evening had gone indigo over the river. Lanterns threw soft amber over stone. The air smelled of basil from the kitchen planters and the metallic promise of rain. He let go of me the moment we were alone. That restraint landed hard. "You should be afraid," he said. "I am. Good." I folded my arms. "I'm also angry. Better. Is that genuinely how you comfort women?" "No," He looked out over the dark water. It's how I tell the truth. For a while neither of us spoke. Below the terrace, the river moved black and indifferent, reflecting broken chains of light from the opposite bank. Somewhere behind us, the house hummed with people locking down entrances and checking names against cameras and old loyalties. I leaned on the stone balustrade and wished my knees would stop remembering his hand on my ankle from the church steps. "What was Serafina's letter?" I asked quietly. His jaw tightened. "Not yours. That isn't an answer. It isn't meant to be. Do you ever say the thing under the thing?" He turned then, one shoulder brushing the pillar beside me. Close, not touching. Close enough that every nerve I own became a witness. "Only when it costs me," he said. I looked at him despite myself. Something in his face had gone bare by fractions. Not softer, never that. But more visible, the scar near his mouth whitened when he clenched his teeth. "Was she your sister?" I asked. "Yes. And Raphael, don't." The word came low, ruined around the edges. "Not yet." That was the closest thing to pleading I had ever heard from him, so I stopped. The rain began as a fine mist, just enough to silver the terrace stone. I should have stepped back inside. Instead, I stood there with him, letting the damp settle on my skin. His hand rose once, almost touched a strand of wet hair against my cheek, then stopped in midair. Another almost. He dropped it. "That one hurt. You do that a lot," I said before I could stop myself. "Do what?" "Change your mind at the edge of touching me." His gaze held mine. The rain deepened. A drop slid from his temple to his jaw. I wanted absurdly to wipe it away. "Yes," he said. "Why?" A beat, too. "Because I don't touch what I can't promise to keep safe." The words struck so low in me I had to look away. Inside, glass shattered. We both moved at once. The shot came from the upper gallery, not outside. Internal breach. I barely registered Dante shoving me behind the terrace pillar before he drew and fired once, twice, clean as breath. Men shouted in the hall. Another bullet cracked the lantern above us, raining hot glass over stone. I ran when he told me to run. That was new enough to feel like a revelation. Through the kitchen. Past Myrla, dragging a younger maid under a marble prep table with the efficiency of a general. Paolo appeared at the service door with blood on his sleeve and a gun in each hand. "Please tell me this is not the relaxing part of the evening," he said. A body hit the doorway behind him. He fired without changing expression. Lucia's voice came sharp through the comms from somewhere deeper in the house. "Two in the east corridor, one moving toward the library." "The ledgers," I said. Paolo pointed with his chin. "Boss took them to the safe room. Also, for the record, I hate everyone." Then an arm hooked around my throat from behind. I reacted before fear could. There was a lace pin in my pocket from the workroom upstairs, long and fine as a stiletto. I drove it backward into flesh. The man cursed, loosened, and Paolo shot him before he hit the tile. He stared at me. "Madonna, remind me never to critique your embroidery." I was shaking too hard to answer. By the time the house went quiet, 3 men were dead, one dying in the foyer, and Dante's knuckles were split open again. Not from the fight. From after, I thought. From something he had hit, once the adrenaline stopped having work to do. He found me in the blue room, while the doctor was stitching Paolo's arm downstairs, and Lucia coordinated the cleanup with an expression that promised future funerals. Rain tapped at the windows. I had changed out of the blood-spotted sweater and into one of Myrla's old cotton nightgowns. My hands would not stop shaking. I stood at the dresser, trying to fasten a black lace cuff around my wrist, a ridiculous reflex, the old urge to cover before anyone could ask. Dante came up behind me and closed his hand over mine. The lace stilled. "Don't," he said. I did not turn. "I know." His hand remained over mine a moment longer than necessary. Heat spread through my wrist, up my arm, into the dangerous center of me. "I nearly got Paolo killed," I whispered. "You got yourself free. I should still be horrified that this is becoming normal. You are horrified. I'm also here." When I turned, he was too close. Close enough that the room lost its corners. His gaze dropped to my mouth and stopped there so openly that my breath failed me. "I don't know what this is," I said. because truth had become easier around him than strategy. I only know I don't want you to stop looking at me like I matter. His composure cracked by a single visible line. Then he kissed me, slowly, as if he were still trying not to. His mouth was warm, careful, devastatingly restrained. One hand cupped the back of my neck. The other stayed flat against the dresser beside my hip, anchoring him away from taking more than I could give. I kissed him back with all the uncertainty I had, which was apparently enough to make him make a low, wrecked sound I felt in my bones. When his tongue brushed mine, I trembled. He drew back immediately. "Adriana, no," my fingers closed in the front of his shirt. "Don't apologize for something I'm still standing in." For one beat, he looked at me like a starving man who had finally admitted he was hungry. Dante had known the moment he wanted her. Not when he saw the bruises, not when she offered her wrist. It was when she said, "If you're going to see it, don't be polite." No one had ever handed him pain without asking what it bought them. He had been ruined from there. His forehead touched mine, briefly. The intimacy of it nearly undid me. Then he stepped back, restraint, again. Always because I mattered more than what he wanted. "There's no more pretending this is contained," he said. Outside, thunder rolled over the river. War had arrived. I made my mistake because I wanted one thing too badly: the truth. 3 days after the attack, while Dante turned the city inside out for the men who had breached his house, my uncle Renato called from a number Lucia had not yet burned. I should have handed the phone over untouched. Instead, I answered in the linen closet off the upstairs hall, surrounded by fresh sheets and lavender starch, and listened to my uncle cry. Real tears. Real terror, that was the worst part. "Adriana," he whispered, "please, I didn't know what Carlo meant to do. I didn't know it would become this." I gripped the shelf hard enough to bite my palm. "You signed the property transfers. They said it was temporary, to keep creditors away from the atelier. You opened the crypt." Silence. Then, brokenly, "Your father trusted the wrong men." "I was trying to keep you alive." I laughed once. It came out ugly. "There are pages missing," I said. "What did you give them?" "Not over the phone." "Meet me?" Every warning Dante had ever given me rose at once. I said yes anyway. Not because I trusted Renato, because I wanted my father back in some form that answered questions. Lucia insisted on coming when I told her half the truth, that Renato had reached out. I left out that I had already agreed on the place. That omission sat like poison in my mouth all the way there. We met him behind the old Belafere warehouse on the waterfront, the one my father had sold before the stroke. Fog dragged low over the river. Rust streaked the loading doors. The whole place smelled of salt, oil, and old mistakes. Lucia checked the perimeter, Josette. "If this turns stupid, you listen to me." "That sounds likely." She looked at me then, really looked. "He is family. That makes him more dangerous, not less." I nodded. Renato emerged from the side door wearing the same signet ring I had seen waxed into the crypt chest. He looked smaller than I remembered. Older. Men always did once fear took the starch out of them. He held no gun, only an envelope. "I'm sorry," he said before he even reached us. I wanted that to matter. It didn't. "What did you give them?" I asked. "Copies, only copies." "Your father kept records of payments, judges, councilmen, shipments through the rectory charities, names buried in lace commissions." Renato swallowed hard. "Raphael came back for one thing in particular. The letter for Serafina," Lucia said sharply. Renato's eyes flicked. Guilt answers faster than mouths do. Before I could press, the first shot rang out. Lucia moved faster than thought. She shoved me down behind a concrete barrier as glass burst overhead. Men appeared along the catwalks inside the warehouse, shadows breaking into rifles and muzzle flashes. Renato screamed once and dropped the envelope. "Ambush!" Lucia snapped into her comms. "South waterfront now." The next bullet hit her. For 1 second I did not understand what I was seeing. She jerked backward, eyes wide, hand clamping over the blood blooming high in her shoulder. Then I understood everything. This happened because I came. This happened because I had wanted answers badly enough to risk the people protecting me. Lucia shoved me toward the loading bay door with her good arm. Move. I'm not leaving you. Then drag me and be useful. I dragged. It is strange what the body can do when the mind has no room left to argue. I got her inside behind a forklift while shots cracked metal around us. Renato crawled toward us bleeding from the thigh, sobbing that he had not known they would be here, which was not the same as innocence. I grabbed the dropped envelope. Inside was a torn copy of ledger pages and a photograph. Dante as a boy. Serafina beside him. Raphael on the other side, thin and dark-eyed, one arm slung around Dante's shoulders like family. Brothers almost. The warehouse doors blew inward as Dante's men arrived. What followed did not feel like a fight. It felt like arithmetic. Clean, efficient, terrible. Dante came through smoke and broken light like judgment given human shape. He crossed the floor under gunfire without once looking reckless. That was what made it frightening. He was not wild. He was exact. One man fired from the catwalk. Dante put a bullet through his throat before he finished exhaling. Another ran toward the river door. Dante caught him by the collar and drove his face into steel hard enough that I heard bone fail. He found me crouched beside Lucia, my hands slick with her blood, Renato moaning nearby. His gaze took in everything at once. My face, Lucia's wound, the envelope, the truth I had not told him. He did not ask, that was worse. "Get her out," he said to Paolo, who had arrived pale and furious with a medic at his heels. Paolo knelt beside Lucia and looked at the blood soaking his immaculate shirt. "Fantastic," he said through clenched teeth. "Myrla is going to say I attract bullets because I'm too dramatic." Lucia, white with pain, managed, "You are too dramatic." I almost cried at the sound of her being herself. At the hospital, the fluorescent lights made everyone look guilty. Lucia went into surgery. Paolo paced the corridor with a paper cup of vending machine tea he hated on principle. Myrla arrived carrying a sweater for me, a rosary for Lucia, and sandwiches no one deserved. Dante stood at the far window, blood dried on his collar, hands braced on the sill. I walked to him when my legs finally agreed. "I lied," I said. He did not turn. "I know. I thought if Renato gave me something first, maybe I could keep this from getting worse." He looked back then. His eyes were not angry. They were stripped. That was harder to bear. "You don't get to decide alone what worse is," he said. "No. Lucia nearly died because you wanted answers from a man already feeding wolves." Each word landed clean. "I know." He studied me for a long moment. "Do you?" That hurt because some part of me had still believed intention softened consequence. It didn't. He pulled a passport wallet from his coat and set it on the chair between us. My name on the travel documents, a flight number, a car arranged for dawn. "What is this?" I asked, though I knew. "An exit." My throat closed. "You said you wouldn't keep anyone who wanted to walk into danger with both eyes open. That wasn't permission to drag my people into it blind." He looked past me toward the operating room doors. "Lucia lives, you leave tomorrow. Safe house in Florence, new papers, a workshop if you want one. And if I say no," his jaw shifted once, "then you stop being under my protection and start being part of the war. Is that supposed to frighten me?" "No," his voice dropped. "It's supposed to tell you what standing beside me costs." Something in me broke open then, not because he was pushing me away, because he was finally telling the truth without padding it. I looked at the blood on his cuffs, at the hospital light cutting his face into harsher planes, and understood that safety with him had always been a paradox. He made me feel safer than anyone ever had, and the world around him was a machine built to punish that. Stage 2. I was no longer afraid of him. I was afraid of myself around him. When the surgeon finally came out and said Lucia would live, Paolo sat down on the corridor floor and crossed himself with the tea still in his hand. Myrla kissed his hair as if he were 6. Dante did not move. At dawn, the car for the airport waited. I got in. The airport smelled like coffee, perfume, and false choices. I sat at a departure gate bound for Florence with a passport I had not asked for, and a life arranged by a man who knew exactly how to protect me by removing me. Dawn had gone pale across the glass. Business travelers rolled silver suitcases past my knees. A little girl in rabbit slippers slept across 3 chairs with her face in her mother's lap. Everything looked ordinary enough to be cruel. Paolo had driven me in silence for most of the way. At the curb he handed me a garment bag, a sealed envelope from Dante, and a paper sack from Myrla. "Biscotti," he said. "And one sandwich she swore was for later, which means eat it before security." I looked at him, at the shadows beneath his kind eyes, and shame moved through me fresh. "How is Lucia?" Threatening nurses, which for her is a love language. He shifted. "Boss didn't come because if he did, you wouldn't get on the plane." "That sounds presumptuous." Paolo gave me a long look. "No, signorina." "It sounds accurate." He started to turn away, then hesitated. "For the record, if you stay gone, I'll understand. I enjoy being alive, highly recommend it." A beat. "But if you come back because you choose it, not because he scares you. He doesn't want that." After he left, I opened Dante's envelope. Inside was a single key from my atelier and one line written in his blunt hand. "You were never wrong to want the truth, only wrong to chase it alone." I read it 3 times and hated that my eyes burned. Then I noticed something catching on the edge of the paper inside the garment bag. Black lace. One of my father's old gloves must have snagged there when Myrla packed my things. I drew it out, the same whisper of thread over skin raising every memory it carried. Ballroom, bruise, crypt, kiss. The whole story had begun with lace giving way under Dante's fingers. I turned the glove over absently and froze. Along the inside seam, nearly invisible unless backlit, my father had worked a final set of denser knots. Not part of the original code, later additions, a coda. I held it against the window. Coordinates again, no times, feast days, St. Michael's procession route, and one phrase worked into the floral repeat in my father's peculiar shorthand. Bell twice, fire below. Save the children first. My blood went cold. St. Michael's feast was tonight. The schoolchildren always led the candle procession through the lower hall before evening mass. Below the church were the old storage rooms and gas lines no one had properly updated in decades. Raphael was not planning another message. He was planning a public massacre in the one place Dante could never walk away from, and Dante did not know. The boarding call sounded. I stood. For one suspended second, my body faced Florence and my soul faced downtown Manhattan. Safety to the right, fire to the left, an old life already breaking behind me. A new one dark enough to stain what remained. This was the real choice. No one was trapping me. No one was carrying me. No one was seducing me with fantasy. I could leave and live. Or I could walk back in with my eyes open. I turned away from the gate. The hardest part was how calm I felt once I chose. At the taxi stand, I called the only number I had memorized from Dante's house. Lucia's backup line. Paolo answered on the first ring. "Please tell me you missed the flight because airports are class warfare," he said. "Listen carefully. St. Michael's tonight. Lower hall, fire below, get the children out." The line went dead. A hand closed over my mouth. Renato's signet ring scraped my cheek as he dragged me backward between 2 parked vans. I bit hard enough to taste blood. He cursed and shoved me into the rear of a black SUV, where another man waited with a chloroform cloth that smelled like old movies and bad planning. I drove my lace pin into his thigh before the cloth hit my face. He screamed. Renato slapped me so hard the world sparked white. "You stupid girl," he hissed, pressing the cloth down at last. "You should have stayed on the plane." When I woke, I was in darkness thick enough to taste. Not total. One naked bulb swung overhead, throwing yellow arcs across concrete walls and rusted pipes. A cellar, maybe. My wrists were bound in front of me with plastic ties. Someone had taken my boots. My lip was split. The room smelled of damp stone, gasoline, and cheap cologne. Renato sat on an overturned crate across from me, head in his hands. For a minute I thought he was praying. Then I realized he was crying. "Where are we?" I asked. He looked up slowly. His face had aged 10 years in a day. "Somewhere you should never have come back to. You sold me." His flinch answered before his mouth did. "I sold Pages." "Not you." That distinction sounds very precious to men. He stared at the floor. Raphael said if I brought you in, he'd let your father's debts die with me. My laugh hurt my lip. And you believed him. I believed what I needed. There it was, the engine of almost every betrayal I had ever seen. Need wearing truth's coat. Footsteps approached. Raphael Vescari entered without hurry, as if darkness itself had made room for him. He was leaner than Dante, lighter on his feet, elegant in a way that felt practiced. Beautiful if beauty had learned contempt young. The eyes were the worst part, familiar to the photograph. Familiar enough to make me understand how close he and Dante must once have stood before everything split. He took one look at my bound hands and smiled. So this is lace. I lifted my chin. Only to people I regret meeting. His smile widened. I see why he wants to keep you. The fear arrived then, real and cold, not because he might kill me, because he understood something true. He crouched in front of me, gaze dropping to the torn black glove still half hanging from my coat pocket. You know what your father hid, he said. You know where Dante's dead are buried. I know enough to say you should leave churches out of your grievances. A shadow crossed his face, gone quickly. Still moral, he murmured. How inconvenient. When he rose, Renato whispered, You promised no harm. Raphael looked almost surprised. No, Renato, I promised speed. The shot cracked so close my ears rang. Renato folded sideways off the crate. I did not scream. I tasted blood and terror and did not give him that. Raphael turned back to me with something like approval. Good. Don't break yet. He left the bulb swinging. I looked at my uncle's body, then at my bound hands, and let the horror pass through without drowning me. In the sleeve seam of my coat, my father had once taught me to hide emergency needles for fittings on impossible clients. I twisted, reached, found one. My fingers shook. I kept working. If Dante came, I needed to still be someone worth rescuing. And if he was too late, I needed to leave a wound behind me. Time became touch. The sting of the hidden needle cutting plastic ties strand by strand. The damp bite of concrete through my stockings. The ache in my jaw where Renato had struck me. The slow, patient whisper of lace as I unwound the torn glove from my pocket and used its thread to bind the needle to a splinter of crate wood, making something crude and sharp. I thought of my father teaching me to repair antique collars by lantern light when the power failed in winter. Fine work is only panic made useful, he used to say. I had never understood him better. Above me, the building groaned with footsteps and distant doors. Once, somewhere far off, I heard church bells begin to ring for evening devotion. Twice, fire below, my whole body seized. I forced myself to breathe. Panic without motion was a luxury. I slid the loose ties from my wrists just as the door opened again. Raphael came back alone. He carried 2 glasses of water on a tray like a host in a civilized house. I hated him for the elegance of that, for how closely it rhymed with Dante and bent the rhyme toward cruelty. You're quieter than I expected, he said. I'm saving my energy for your funeral. He actually laughed. There you are. He set the tray down on the crate beside Renato's body, as if blood were merely another texture in the room. Then he leaned against the wall and studied me with infuriating patience. Do you know what Dante never understood? He asked. I said nothing. That love is leverage the moment it exists. You say that like a man who's never been loved. The laugh vanished. Good. He pushed off the wall. We were boys together. Dante and I, St. Michael's took in strays no one wanted. Father Domenico taught us scripture, locks, Latin, and how to move money through charitable accounts, while respectable men knelt upstairs and spoke of salvation. He smiled without warmth. Your father embroidered the receipts. I stared. Another layer of truth, uglier than the first. Raphael crouched before me, forearms on his knees. Dante was always better at being good in public. Better at looking like restraint meant virtue. His gaze sharpened. But when Serafina died, tell me, who made the choice that left her where fire could find her? My throat closed. Because that was the mirror, wasn't it? Not a man opposite Dante. A man built from the same wreckage, who had chosen a different lesson from the same wound. You're trying to make me afraid of him, I said. No, Raphael's eyes flicked to the door. I'm trying to make you accurate. Boots thundered overhead. He stood at once, smile thin. And here he is. The explosion above us shook dust from the ceiling. Raphael's men shouted. Gunfire answered from the outer hall. I drove my improvised spike into the side of his knee as he turned. He made a sound I would remember forever. By the time he staggered back, I had Renato's dropped pistol in my hand. I had never fired one before. That did not matter. I pointed it anyway. The cellar door burst inward. Dante filled it. Not alone, Paolo behind him, white-faced and limping, two of Dante's men at his shoulders. But Dante was the only thing I saw. Blood marked his collar again. Soot streaked one cheek. His eyes found me in the dark, and for the first time since I had known him, I saw naked fear. Adriana. He said my name like something sacred enough to kneel for. Raphael kicked the gun from my hand and grabbed me by the throat before Dante crossed half the room. His forearm locked under my chin. The barrel of his own pistol pressed at my temple. Everything stopped. Paolo, from the doorway, sounded astonishingly offended. Honestly. The hostage thing is so unoriginal. It was such a Paolo sentence that I almost laughed. Dante's voice went quiet enough to chill the walls. Let her go. Raphael smiled against my hair. And miss seeing whether you've learned anything at all. I felt Dante measure the room. Distance, angle, breath, cost. Then he did the one thing I had never seen him do. He put his gun down. Boss, Paolo started. No, Dante said. The word cracked like iron. Raphael went still. Even he had not expected that. I understood suddenly with cold clarity what he wanted. Not victory, witness. He wanted to see Dante choose love over power and suffer for it. I also understood something else. Men like Raphael believed tenderness weakened the hand that held it. Men like Dante kept proving the opposite. I drove my heel backward onto Raphael's injured knee. His grip faltered. Dante moved. The next 2 seconds were too fast for memory to separate cleanly. Dante crossing the room, Raphael firing and missing high, Paolo shooting the bulb, darkness crashing down, my body hitting concrete. The smell of cordite and damp stone, and old fear. When the emergency light clicked red above the door, Raphael was gone through the rear passage, and Dante was on his knees in front of me. Hands at my jaw, my throat, my wrists, cataloging damage. Look at me. I did. His hands shook once. That shook me harder. I'm fine, I whispered. You're not. No, my eyes burned. But I'm here. His forehead nearly touched mine and stopped. Another almost, even now. Don't do this to me again. The words were so raw they emptied the room. I came back, I said. I know, not because you ordered it. I know, because children were going to burn in a church. His eyes closed briefly. I know. Paolo turned away with suspicious speed and muttered to one of the men. I'm giving them privacy before I vomit from feelings. We got out through the rear passage into the church undercroft where smoke already crawled along the ceiling. The lower hall had been rigged, but Lucia, arm in a sling, furious enough to frighten the paramedics, had cleared the children in time. Small miracles were apparently still in circulation. Outside, sirens painted St. Michael's in red and white. Flames licked one basement window, but had not taken the nave. Father Domenico sat on the curb with soot on his cassock and blood at his temple, whispering the names of the children as they were counted. Lucia saw me and looked as if she wanted to throttle me herself before checking whether I was alive. That would be fair, I said. Later, she replied. Only then did I see Paolo's limp more clearly, the blood soaking one trouser leg. You're hurt. He waved a dismissive hand. A graze, very rude but survivable. Meyerlo will overreact and then make soup I absolutely didn't ask for. I laughed and cried at the same time. Dante stood a little apart, looking at the church with the face of a man staring at the ghost of his own worst night. The letter for Serafina was in his breast pocket. I knew it without seeing it. When I went to him, he did not turn. I stopped beside him anyway. He told me about the orphanage, I said quietly. A muscle shifted in his jaw. He wants the feast tomorrow, Dante said. Public. Final, he'll come for the names, the church records, and anyone who can still identify him before. I looked at the smoke, then at the city gathering itself around the wound. And one of us might not survive that, I said. At last he looked at me. Neither of us lied. By morning, grief had become logistics. St. Michael's feast would proceed in reduced form because canceling it would hand panic to the wrong men. The lower hall was sealed. The children were moved to the convent school uptown. Police hovered at the edges, officially for fire investigation, and unofficially because half the city's dirty names sat somewhere in the ledgers now under Dante's control. I sat at the long dining table with Lucia, Paolo, Father Domenico, and Dante while maps of the church, procession route, adjoining alleys, and old utility tunnels covered the linen like a war made domestic. Lucia, pale but vertical, warned me 3 times not to martyr myself into usefulness. Paolo, limping theatrically, asked if tactical briefings always came with dry toast, or whether this was punishment specifically for him. Myrla set down a tray of espresso cups and said, "If you survive tonight, I'll make lasagna." Paolo touched his heart. This is the strongest incentive structure I've ever experienced. No one told him to be quiet. That was the mercy of loving funny men in dark houses. They made space where fear would otherwise occupy everything. I put my father's copied pattern sheets beside the church map. He didn't only hide names. He hid roots. I traced the interrupted floral repeats with my finger. These marks correspond to service passages beneath the rectory and sacristy walls. If Raphael helped move money through the church as a boy, he knows them. He'll use old ways in. Lucia leaned closer. "Can you mark the probable entry?" "I can do better." I turned another page. This repeat here was added later. Different tension. My father was correcting an old path because one access was bricked after the fire that killed Serafina. Silence fell. Dante's gaze lifted to me. "You're certain?" "Yes." He held my eyes for one hard second. Not because I mentioned Serafina, because I had just handed him the map to the place where his life broke. He said only, "Show me." We spent the afternoon turning lace into defense. It should have been absurd. It was. My father had hidden the city's sins in decorative thread, and now his daughter was using the same language to keep more blood from staining stone. At dusk, the feast lights came on across the church courtyard. Vendors opened sweet carts and sausage grills to preserve the shape of normalcy. Women lit votive candles. Children, rerouted but still dressed in white, clustered around nuns with paper lanterns trembling in their hands. I wore a plain black dress and no gloves. That felt important. Dante saw it and said nothing, but his gaze rested once on my bare wrists before moving on. He stationed me in the rectory archive with Father Domenico, 2 armed men outside. The original ledgers in a steel case, and the most critical pages already scanned for release if the night went wrong enough to demand scorched-earth honesty. Raphael wanted leverage. Dante was prepared to burn it rather than let him hold it. That, too, cost something. If the files went public, judges fell, politicians bled, half the city's quiet alliances cracked open. Dante would lose protections he had spent years cultivating. Clean victory was never on offer. "You stay here," he said. "Do not say it as a noun." His eyes darkened faintly. "Stay with Father Domenico." "That's better." He stepped closer, close enough that the sounds of the feast beyond the shutters dimmed. "If it turns, you leave through the north passage with Lucia." "Dante, no arguments tonight." "I'm not arguing." My voice lowered. "I'm memorizing how you sound when you're scared." The words landed. He did not deny them. Instead, he lifted one hand, stopped just before touching my cheek, then let his knuckles brush the air beside it. Another almost. "Even here, even now." Then he left. Dante had spent years believing love made men stupid in exactly the way Raphael claimed. Yet every move he made tonight was cleaner because she existed. Harder, more exact. The cost was not that he loved her. The cost was that if he lost her, the part of him built from restraint might go with her. The first shots came during the litany. Father Domenico cursed like a dockworker and shoved me behind the archive desk as glass burst inward. One of the guards outside went down. The other returned fire. From the corridor came the thunder of men moving through hidden passages exactly where I had marked them. I grabbed the steel case and ran. Not away. Toward the north passage, then stopped when I heard children screaming from the courtyard below. Raphael had split the attack, one team for the ledgers, one for spectacle. I looked at the steel case in my hands and understood choice in its ugliest form: leverage or lives. I opened the furnace door at the end of the corridor and fed the copied ledger sheets into the flames first. Then the originals. Wax seals blackened, curled, vanished. Names of powerful men rose once in heat and were gone forever. My father's work, Dante's leverage, the city's rot, released as smoke rather than currency. It cost enough to feel honest. By the time I reached the courtyard, chaos had taken the feast apart. Lanterns burned on the stones. A grill cart had overturned. Paolo was dragging two children behind the fountain, while swearing that if anyone shot his other leg, he would sue. Lucia, one-armed and impossible, directed civilians through the convent gate. Raphael stood at the church steps with Dante 10 feet away between them, gunfire thinning, as both sides realized the center had become personal. I saw the likeness clearly then, not in features. In stillness, in the way each man occupied danger like a familiar room. "You burned the ledgers," Raphael called, seeing the soot on my hands. His smile turned sharp. "He chose badly again." "No," I said. Both men looked at me. I stepped into the open with my father's black glove in one hand, the final coated piece. "He chose who gets to live." Raphael's expression changed. Briefly, he had not expected me to understand the argument. "That was always his weakness," he said. "He keeps thinking he's different from me because he pauses before the knife." Dante's voice was quiet. "No, I'm different because I know what the knife costs." Raphael laughed once. "Then feel it." He fired at me. Paolo moved first, shoving me sideways so the bullet tore through his shoulder instead of my chest. He hit the fountain edge with a howl of theatrical outrage that ended in real pain. "Absolutely not," he gasped. "Myrla is going to kill everyone." Something in Dante went black. He crossed the distance before I fully saw him move. Raphael got off one more shot, grazing Dante's side. Then the two of them hit the church steps together. Brothers once, enemies correctly, every old wound finally dragged into the light. The fight was short. That made it worse. Raphael was quick. Dante was inevitable. When it ended, Dante had his gun under Raphael's jaw and blood running down one temple. Raphael, kneeling on holy stone, smiled up at him with contempt and something sadder beneath it. "Serafina loved me too," he said. Dante went still. The whole courtyard did. Raphael breathed hard. "She came to warn me you'd chosen the meeting over moving us. She thought she could save both of us. The fire was meant for records, not her." Truth, at last, in the ugliest possible mouth. I saw it hit Dante like a second bullet. The old guilt, the new one, the impossible geometry of blame. Raphael smiled through blood. "Do it, brother." Dante closed his eyes for one fraction of a second. When he opened them, the boy from St. Michael's was gone. The shot echoed off stone and stained glass. No one spoke for a long time. Then all at once the courtyard returned. Sirens, crying children, Lucia barking for medics, Paolo trying to stay conscious long enough to complain meaningfully. Father Domenico crossed himself over Raphael's body and wept not because the man was innocent, but because he had once been a child in his care. I knelt beside Paolo while medics cut away his jacket. He stared at the blood and said weakly, "Please tell Myrla I died brave and thin." "You're not dying." "Then tell her thin." I laughed through tears. Across the courtyard, Dante stood alone on the church steps, blood on his hands, smoke in the night, the place of his first wound finally silenced. When he came to me, his face looked carved from the cost of it. I reached for him anyway. "It's over," I whispered. This time it was. War ended messily. There were funerals without coffins, investigations without clean answers, newspapers suddenly brave enough to mention names they had spent years politely stepping around. Councilman Rinaldi resigned before charges arrived. Carlo vanished into a federal arrangement no one in polite society admitted understanding. My uncle Renato was buried beside my father because blood remains inconvenient even after betrayal. Lucia healed with a scar and a worse temper. Paolo survived with a bullet groove across the shoulder and a renewed, theatrical devotion to soup. Father Domenico retired from St. Michael's under a cloud of mercy no one fully deserved. Dante dismantled parts of his own machinery with the same efficiency he once used to preserve it. Dirty routes closed. Men who preferred Raphael's methods were offered exile or consequences. Several chose consequences because men are often most loyal to the habits killing them. Through all of it, I lived in the blue room and then, gradually, did not. It happened without announcement. My shoes by the front hall bench, my comb in the bathroom drawer beside his razor. Pattern cards spread over the library table after midnight while he read security reports on the sofa and pretended not to watch my hands. Ordinary trespasses. Intimacy by accumulation. The first time I kissed him in daylight. It was because he was bleeding from a cut at his hairline and trying to discuss shipment rerouting as though my whole body had not gone still at the sight of it. "Stop talking," I said. He did. That alone should have frightened markets. I kissed him once, gently, tasting surprise and clean skin and the faint bitterness of espresso. When I pulled back, he looked at me with a heat so contained it made my knees unreliable. "Again," he said. A command, yes, but his hands remained at his sides until I nodded. That was the thing about loving him. The danger never left. It learned manners around me. By November, the atelier had reopened in a narrow, restored storefront 3 blocks from St. Michael's, funded partly by insurance, partly by anonymous benefaction no one admitted came from Dante, and partly by my own refusal to let Belafir become only a cautionary tale. Meyerla oversaw the back room as if sewing notions were military assets. Paolo installed security cameras and complained that thread inventory was more exhausting than extortion. Lucia handled the books twice a week and glared at anyone who flirted with me badly. One rain-heavy evening I found Dante in the kitchen long after midnight, sleeves rolled, staring at a pot as though intimidation might improve pasta water. "You're cooking," I said from the doorway. "No, you are standing in front of a stove with intent. That's not the same. It is in fact exactly the same." He looked over his shoulder. Meyerla left instructions. I crossed the room, smelled garlic, tomatoes, basil, and the unmistakable panic of a powerful man confronting domesticity. "Show me." He handed over the wooden spoon with enough reluctance to make me smile. On the counter beside the cutting board lay a small velvet box. I stopped. He saw me see it, and for perhaps the 3rd time since I had known him, looked uncertain. That mattered more than jewels. "Dante." He turned the flame down, wiped his hand once on a towel for no practical reason, and faced me fully. "This is not a fairy tale," he said. Trust him to make a proposal sound like a legal warning. I waited. "My world is still violent. I am still what I am. Loving you did not make me harmless." His gaze held mine with brutal steadiness. "It made me accountable to someone whose opinion can ruin my week." A laugh escaped me, wet around the edges. He continued, lower now. "If you stay, I won't promise ease. I won't promise perfect safety, because only stupid men promise what the world can break. I will promise truth. And I will promise that every room I enter, every choice I make, will remember you exist." My throat tightened so hard I had to grip the counter. He opened the box. Inside was not a giant diamond, not the vulgar kind of absolution men buy when they want sparkle to do emotional labor. It was an old ring, narrow platinum, set with a single antique stone and tiny black enamel work around the band that looked, when I leaned closer, like lace. "My mother S," he said. "She wore it until the day she died. Serafina was meant to have it after." The weight of that nearly dropped me to my knees. "You don't have to answer now," he said, which was how I knew he was frightened. Dante Salvator only multiplied words when the truth mattered enough to destabilize him. "You can say no. You can ask for time. You can ask me to leave the room so you can yell at the ceiling in private." I laughed through tears. That is the worst proposal speech anyone has ever given. Likely, but very honest. That was the objective. I stepped closer until the heat from the stove wrapped around us both. I don't want time. Something shifted behind his eyes. Hope, dangerous, humble hope. I want one thing, I said. Name it. Never ask me to love you by pretending you're easier than you are. He exhaled once, deeply, as if some guarded thing in him had finally been allowed to sit down. Never, he said. I held out my hand. He slid the ring onto my finger with the same care he had once used removing a black lace glove from bruised skin in a ballroom full of people who wanted not to see. The symmetry of it nearly broke me. When he looked up, there was no coldness left in the nickname. Thank you, Lace. Warm now, entirely. I touched his face because I could, because he let me. Because the first time he saw my hurt, he had not asked what it could do for him, and I had been walking toward this moment ever since. Later we ate overcooked pasta at the kitchen table, while rain tapped the windows and Paolo, limping in at 1 in the morning for reasons known only to thieves and insomniacs. Saw the ring and clutched his chest. Oh, finally, he said. Now Myrla owes me $20. Myrla appeared behind him as if summoned by disrespect. I owe you nothing. Also, that sauce is too thin. Dante glanced at me. You see what I endure. No, I said softly. I see what we built. Outside, the rain eased. Inside, the ordinary thing felt impossible enough to be holy. 9 months later, the lace still whispered the same way. Dry, delicate. A soft sliding sound over skin that made my body remember too many versions of itself at once. I stood in the dressing room above my reopened atelier, with one black glove already on, and the other waiting on the table, beside a cluster of pearl pins. Outside, St. Michael's bells were ringing the first call for evening mass, and the street below glowed with summer light and the steady noise of people arriving for the church's restoration gala. The school wing had been rebuilt. The lower hall smelled of fresh paint instead of smoke. Children would sing in the courtyard tonight where gunfire once cracked marble and stained glass. My hands should not have been shaking, and yet, there are some rooms that teach your body old habits before your mind can argue. The door opened behind me without a knock. I saw Dante first in the mirror. My husband still felt like a dangerous word in my head, not because it was wrong, because it was so exact. He wore black as always, though tonight the suit was cut softer through the shoulders, summer wool instead of armor. His scar caught the light when he paused in the doorway. The ring on my left hand, his mother's ring, Serafina's almost ring, mine now, flashed once against the dark lace. His gaze went there immediately. Of course it did. He crossed the room with that same impossible quiet he had carried into the ballroom the night he changed my life. I watched him in the mirror until he stopped behind me. Why the gloves? He asked. Not sharp, not suspicious, just direct enough that pretending would have insulted us both. I looked down at my hands. It's a public room, old families, donors. Too much staring. And I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. And sometimes when too many people are looking, some part of me still wants armor. He was quiet. Then he reached past me and touched the edge of the lace at my wrist. The sound it made, soft thread against skin, went through me like memory-given hands. I met his eyes in the mirror. If you're going to see it, I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt, don't be polite. Something moved across his face. Not surprise, recognition so old it had become tenderness. That was it, the thing that had undone him from the beginning. Not beauty, not fragility. The fact that when truth cost me something, I still turned my palm upward instead of bargaining. He slid the glove down slowly. This time there was no bruise beneath it, only my bare wrist, a faint white scar near the pulse from the cellar, his mother's ring on my hand. My life, visible and chosen. Dante looked at my uncovered skin for a long moment, then lifted it and pressed his mouth to the inside of my wrist. I closed my eyes. You still do it, he said quietly. What? Hand me the truth before I've earned the right to hold it. His thumb brushed the base of my palm. It still lands the same. I turned to face him fully. And what does it cost you now? His eyes held mine, dark and steady and more honest than they had any right to be. "Everything that matters," he said. The answer should have frightened me. Instead, it felt like home. Downstairs, a child shrieked with laughter. Someone called for more candles. The city kept moving around us, rude enough to continue. I smiled despite myself. If we're late to our own fundraiser. Lucia will have us both shot on principle. She'll make Paolo do it. Paolo would miss on purpose. Paolo would cry first. That proved accurate within 20 minutes. The gala filled the restored church courtyard with light, music, and the warm crush of bodies pressed together under white lanterns. Women in silk drifted beneath the arches. Priests pretended not to notice the armed men stationed discreetly near the gates. Children from the school choir wore tiny gold crosses and sang like the world had never once frightened them. I stood beside Dante near the display of restored altar lace and tried, not for the first time, to understand the scale of the ordinary thing we had made. My atelier had funded the preservation of St. Michael's old vestments. Meyerla now ran the back workroom as if seam allowances were sacred law. Lucia handled the scholarship accounts and terrified the donor board into competence. Father Domnico, officially retired, sat in the front row with a cane and the smug expression of a man who believed suffering had finally produced administrative value. And Paolo appeared in a tuxedo that fit him suspiciously well, which meant Meyerla had bullied him into tailoring instead of weight loss. He stopped beside me carrying a tray of champagne and whispered, "If anyone asks, I achieved this silhouette through discipline and profound spiritual emptiness." Meyerla, behind him, adjusted his boutonniere with ruthless precision. "He achieved it because I hid the cannoli." Paolo looked heavenward. "This is abuse in formal wear." Then Meyerla kissed his cheek, quick and matter-of-fact, and Paolo went so still I thought he might die standing up. I laughed. So did Dante, softly under his breath. Paolo pressed a hand to his chest. "Did everyone see that, or have I passed into the next life?" "You're still here," Lucia said, walking by with a ledger under one arm. "Unfortunately, cruel woman. A live woman," she corrected. He actually smiled at that. Later, after the speeches and the choir, and the children running ribbons around the fountain, Dante stepped away to take a call near the rectory gate. I watched him from across the courtyard as lantern light moved over his face and the old stillness settled into his body again. He listened, answered in Italian, ended the call. Some doors in his world still closed without me. Some nights he still came home with silence on him like smoke. Loving him had never turned darkness into light. It had only made him bring the darkness to someone who would name it honestly and ask what it cost. I did not know if that was redemption. I only knew it was real. When the last donors had gone and the church bells fell quiet, we returned home by the river. The house had changed with us. My work basket sat on the kitchen chair. His files waited beside the fruit bowl. The life we built was not soft because it forgot what came before. It was soft because it remembered and stayed anyway. In our room, I reached for the second glove. Dante caught my hand before I could pull it on. "Leave them," he said. I looked at him. He took the glove from my fingers and set it aside. Then he lifted my bare hand, turned it over, and traced the center of my palm with his thumb. The same gesture, completely different weight. No bruise, no hiding. No man waiting to see what silence could buy him. Just him. Just me. Just the radical, ordinary fact that I no longer had to make damage look elegant in order to survive it. He bent and kissed my ring once. "Come here, Lace," he murmured, and there was nothing cold left in it at all. The first time Dante Salvator reached for my hand, he found a wound. The last time, he found the life we had made around it. And maybe that is the part I still think about in the dark. Whether love changes a man like that, or only gives his violence one witness he can no longer lie to. Tell me this, would you have chosen Dante, knowing exactly what loving him would cost?